Hello and welcome. This is Working Class to World Class. But before we go any further, I do have a little favour of you. If you could hit that follow or subscribe button, then that would be a massive help. Thank you. In this episode, I chat with a guy who grew up in a fishing town. He is now one of the most successful CEOs in the UK. He's a fantastic human and you're absolutely going to love this story. Breaking through the barriers of adversity. I'm Lynn Lester, and this is Working Class to World Class. So Russ, welcome on the show. It's been, I think, an age since I last saw you.
Absolutely. Lovely to see you again, Lynn.
So today, I've known you, Russ, for quite a long time. I'm too frightened to guess how many years or how many decades. But what I didn't realise that you were working class. So for all these years that I've known you, I've seen Russ as the really successful business guy, a leader. But I didn't really know much about your background, so shame on me, but I'm glad I never, because it means now we can explore. So for everyone tuning in, can you just sort of tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Okay, yeah. So I'm Russ Lidstone. I'm the group president of a company called Inizio Engage XD. It's been recently rebranded. It was called the Creative Engagement Group. And that business is about 1,000 people across North America and Europe. And our centers of excellence are in events and experiential, employee engagement, learning and capability, digital, film, and behavioral science. And we have a strong focus on healthcare, but we work with a whole range of different clients. And that business is about 7 years old, and it was created as a private equity-backed business back in 2016. And now we're part of a much bigger company called Inizio, which is a healthcare-focused communications group.
Wow, now that was a lot that you just rhymed off there. And you're no stranger to lots of different markets, different sectors. And I think now, even from the last time we spoke, I reckon it's even more extensive. I think last time it was very much 100% like ad agencies, really.
That's right. My career has been largely centered in advertising on the strategic side, communication. I started out back in the day, I'm not going to say when, Lynn, but back at Coca-Cola when after I graduated, and through the years I worked across a range of different advertising agencies on the strategic planning side. And then I suspect that one of the things that will come up through the conversation is I see my career as a series of happy accidents. And I ended up in leadership positions, running teams. And then as I evolved, moving more into general management and ultimately the CEO of Havas in the UK. And following that advertising period of my life, I moved into this private equity-backed broader communications group, which is engaged in all sorts of different areas, but actually creates this kind of nice virtuous circle of engagement for our client partners.
Wow, okay, well, do you know what? Now we're going to talk less about the business stuff, although it's really, really interesting. But what I'm keen to explore is you. So I want to get under the sort of bonnet of who is Russ and where you came from and just everything that you're willing to share, so the more you share, the better it will be, obviously. So, where were you brought up or where were you born?
So I was born in a place called Brixham in South Devon. Many people listening to this may well know it as part of the what is now termed the English Riviera, three towns, Brixham, Paignton and Torquay. A lot of people go on their holidays there. And it's an interesting dynamic, really, because a lot of people go on holiday to places like Brixham, and Brixham is a working fishing port also. It's, I think, still the largest fishing port in England. But of course, when the holidaymakers go, the economy is very dependent on very small industries. I mean, fishing is really the lifeline for Brixham. But if you're in Paignton or Torquay, you're really dependent on tourism. So interestingly, places like Cornwall, the Isle of Wight, Brixham, Torbay, Devon, there are large areas of deprivation and low income households, and that's kind of where I grew up, really. I grew up in a town. My dad was a compositor in an old printing press, in a place called Pump Street in Brixham. Kind of Dickensian type building with broken windows and a leaky roof. A boss that used to shout at him, and that was his entire life. He spent his life working for someone else in a very thankless place. And ultimately, when he retired, he was earning very little money. I think he was still on something like £11,000, and he committed his life to something that wasn't that fulfilling for him. He was skilled, he was a craftsman, but ultimately very working class. And my mum, likewise, a dinner lady, and worked in a couple of seaside holiday shops, and really spent her time managing the domestic economy, looking after the family, as well as trying to add to the family income with these sort of seasonal jobs. And then in the evenings, I'll always remember, they supplemented their income by doing proofreading. So they were reading documents, whether it was kind of the latest about fishing boats, or it was the latest from the local masons in terms of their brochures and documents. They spent all evenings reading content and checking proof, and so I didn't really see an awful lot of them as a young lad. They were working pretty much all the time. So and everything they did was focused on trying to enable us to have food on the table and a roof over our heads. And actually, even now, I look back at a wonderful life, a beautiful part of the country, no doubt. But things were very challenging and tight.
Wow, I didn't know that. And did you have any siblings?
Yeah, so I have a brother, and he still lives in Brixham actually, or he moved back to Brixham. My parents are both dead now, but yeah, he's back there, and he was obviously someone I was very close to at a young age, and but he suffered from childhood illness called hydrocephalus, and that was quite significant in our family development, if you will, and certainly how I grew up, because he was very, very ill from the age of, I think it was about 8. He's 5 years older than me, so from the age of 3 onwards, for me, about 3 to the age of 10, I was in and out of various sort of lodgings and bed sits in and around Great Ormond Street and Freedom Fields Hospital in Plymouth, and had my younger years of education somewhat disrupted. Now, of course, in comparison to what my brother was going through, he was going through near-death experiences. We were really kind of on the road and disrupted, and it was that actually. We were a low-income household, but because my brother was in hospital a lot, my dad wasn't able to work, and for a long period of time not able to pay the mortgage on what was effectively a new build house. And there was a period where we didn't pay the mortgage, and we were going to get we were going to lose the house. That I wasn't aware of this at the time, and it was charity actually, a charity called Click, or then became Click Sergeant, and I think is now related to a teenage cancer charity, that actually paid our mortgage and saved us from kind of losing our house. So yeah, it was. I mean, like I say, I look back with great fondness over my childhood, but when I think deeply about where I was in strange parts of London and living in a bedsit in Plymouth for large parts of it, and now as an adult I realise why, and I think it did sort of affect all of us, of course, in that level of disruption.
Geez, oh, I mean, well, I've never heard of that illness before. So what does it do?
So it's fluid on the brain. I think it's related to encephalitis and other similar types of brain illness. It develops quite often in teenage children or young children. And yeah, it was, I don't know if today the medical profession would be able to cope with it somewhat more easily, but it's a serious illness. And yeah, he was likely at one point, has been given sort of notice really. And for my parents, obviously, that was extraordinarily tough. And for a long period, they thought that he wasn't going to, live a normal life, which he went on to do. I mean, there were some effects, but largely able to kind of fulfill an adult life. But yeah, it was a challenging time. And again, my parents sacrificed pretty much everything to try and look after me through that period, but also, obviously look after my brother Paul when he was in and out of hospital so readily.
How does that feel? I mean, I don't know if this is a fair thing to ask you or not, but not in the eyes of an adult. That's different. You get it. You know why things happened. But as that kid from, you said from 3 years old and, for many years, you were sort of, it was not as stable as it could have been because you were in and out, you were obviously at the hospital and stuff. How did that make you feel?
Well, I don't know that I was ever, as you say, able to kind of rationalize what was going on. I spent an awful lot of time with relatives who, wonderful family helped to look after me. I found myself in strange bedsits in London. I'll never forget Great Ormond Street. What a wonderful place for so many reasons. But I was on one particular afternoon, I lost my teddy in Regent's Park, and the nurses, and we couldn't afford another one. Um, and the nurses did a whip round and bought me a new teddy, which was then named Marley. And I can remember to this day what Marley looks like. I hope he's still in the loft somewhere. Um, but um, but I remember just disruption and just thinking it was kind of normal. I think it played out though, Lynn, in certain areas. I mean, my education probably could have been a little bit better in the early stages. I was at a primary school that in an area where obviously state schools in Devon split into grammar schools and secondary schools even to this day. So I didn't remember really doing an 11 plus. I must have done, but I did one, and that's what enabled me to go to a state grammar school. But yeah, I remember being at primary school and running away from school, and the teachers coming to the house to come and get me and try and encourage me, let's say, back to school. And there was one teacher who will remain nameless who basically dragged me down the road in my duffel coat. My mum always used to laugh about how she could find the trail of where I'd been by by all the toggles that had been pulled off my coat.
Oh my God. See, the thing is, I always remember, because I'm the youngest of seven kids, and I
Yeah.
remember, like, my sisters will tell me the story about, when they were a nightmare. They never wanted to go to school. And my sister Catherine apparently would run home. She would go to school, and then there would be some reason she would go back home. And she says often she'd find my mum had allowed gypsies in the house, and so she had no silver to give them. She believed it was bad karma, so she brought them in and gave them a cup of tea. So that was her story. Nothing about the toggles. It was all about the tea. And see, the thing is, when your mum and dad's doing this, I guess, you probably don't realise it at the time, but I suppose that's really instilling values in you. Not only does family come first, but do you think now, looking back, you sort of, you can see some attributes that your parents sort of showed you without even meaning to?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think there are a number of them, but the first thing I inherited from my family was whatever we had, they would spend on us, our clothes, our food on the table. That my mum and dad were effectively a reaction to their own childhood. They'd both grown up in quite extreme poverty, with very unloving and uncaring parents. My dad always maintained that he didn't have hair on his legs because he had to wear Wellington boots until the age of 15. I'm not sure if that's true or just an excuse for not having it. And my mum grew up in a very deprived area of Paynton, and I look back on those things, and actually I think it's interesting as a former historian to kind of reflect, because what I heard was bad stories about my certainly my granddad's, and others in the family. But they lived through, the Second World War. They'd seen awful things. My granddad, who went on to become an alcoholic, and I didn't really know him. He'd been in a boat that was sunk 3 times as a merchant vessel, and so he'd seen his mates, die, and that's something that many of us just can't comprehend. So anyway, I think they were a reaction, and I think thank goodness they were, because they believed that everything they did was designed to put food on the table, put a roof over our heads, and create a loving and open home. So one of the byproducts of my parents' upbringing, or the upbringing I had from my parents, was that I have a massive fear of under catering. So if anyone comes to my house for a barbecue, it's like, no, I'm worried that there won't be enough sausages or veggie burgers or whatever. So we have a really open, hospitable, I hope, home, and anyone is welcome. That was certainly something that was, drilled into me from an early age, not forced on me, but it was just what we did. People, if they came to the house, they would be offered something. My mum was a fantastic cook, and there was always a cake or something available. Um, the other thing I think that's really important, and maybe that I see more in my work and my professional career, is um, I take what I do seriously, but I don't take myself so seriously. And I think when you've grown up from a relatively humble background, you don't necessarily kind of see yourself on that pedestal. And even today, it's kind of hard for me to believe that I have this grandiose title and of president and chief marketing officer, and I do what I do. But I do take it seriously. It's just, I'll always have that sort of sense of humility about what I do. And when we talk in this business about everyone who works here, I genuinely mean it when I say that no one is as important as anyone else. Everyone has their role to play. We've all got different roles. We all have different levels of seniority, etc., because that's the way that all businesses have to be organized. But, whether you're the office manager or you're in accounts payable or you're a client director or you're me, we're all playing an important part, I think, in the future of the business. And I think that democratic and egalitarian sort of approach is deeply rooted in how I was brought up. My mum would go out of her way to make anyone who came from maybe a deprived background or an ethnically diverse background, because in Devon, when I was growing up, there was one black lad in the whole of the town, and so I think my mum took it upon herself to make sure that he felt welcome. Now, she probably created the wrong effect, making him feel out of place, but it was her intent to look after anyone who she came into contact with, and really treat everyone with the respect that they deserve. And I think that's a really important point. My biggest thing is treat everyone as you would wish to be treated, and that means if you're in a restaurant, don't look down your nose at the waiter. There's no reason for that. You don't know what their background is. You don't know where they've come from. They're no better or no worse than us. So I think that's a really big, deep-rooted learning from my perspective.
Do you know, it's funny, your parents sound like, well, I'm sure you say it, like salt of the earth, and that's very much like my family. And, it's funny because I'll travel the world, I'll do whatever, and I'll come back and my family will be like, I said, did you have a nice holiday then? I'm like, no, I was really working. But, when even, I'm sure when you look at your family as well, people are doing a lot of manual, what we would still consider very working class jobs. In my head, I am working class. So, I asked Dave Trott that question, one of the most famous creatives in the world. Yeah. And I asked him if he felt he was still working class. And he's like, absolutely. But what about you? Do you still feel working class?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of the interesting things about me is I'm probably one of the few people who read sociology at university. I was one of the first, well, I was the first person in my family to go to university. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But I thought anology sounded really cool, so I thought I'd do that. But I also had an interest in history, so I did history and sociology joint honours at a university called Keele in Staffordshire, which I loved to bits. But I went there because it sounded quite cool, and it was about 300 miles away from my home, and I had a good night out there. So that was the main reason for choosing it. But the reason I mention that is because obviously as a sociologist, you kind of get brought up on the sort of notion of Marxist and Weber sort of thinking around class and social status and so forth. And yeah, I'm working class because I was born into a low income family, close to I think the Marxist term would be the units of economic production. We were not bourgeoisie by any stretch of the imagination. But the world's evolved now, right? So, maybe it's a little bit more complex than that. And Weber's interesting there, and again, probably outmoded because he talked about social status and the difference between class and status. And status is something you go on to achieve and something that comes to you through social approbation and other interactions, not just your proximity to the unit of production. So I think I would be working class, but I'd probably be a different social status. And I think today in a world of Bitcoin and AI, you could argue that units of production may well have kind of been thrown into the wind, and we should think about different classifications. But do I have working class values? Do I believe in social justice? Do I care about society and the people around me? Those, I think, that know me would know that is the case. And so, yes, if that's what working class means, That's what I am. Interestingly, I chair a charity called Creative Mentor Network, and that is a charity that is very a subject close to my heart, which is about giving people opportunities in the creative industries who come from lower socioeconomic or diverse backgrounds. And we've been having this debate recently. You'll notice I said lower socioeconomic and diverse backgrounds because working class does carry, whether we like it or not, some kind of maybe outmoded stigma or doesn't feel as relevant today to the society that we operate in. So, I think I am, but I think the world's a bit more complex now.
Wow, that is the most articulate answer I've ever had to a question. You
Really?
sound really smart, Ross. Of
No,
course you
no.
are. Of course you are.
Well, I told you, Lynn, that the books behind me are a fake. This is vinyl, so it's all about defence with me. Yeah.
I was like, you just read it like a book there. Yeah, that was very good. Let's take you back then. When you're growing up in the household. So you're talking about your brother, who obviously your parents, adored the ground he walked on as they did you. And obviously life. As you were saying, you were in different bed sets, you were moving about, and it was a bit different. But how would you keep yourself occupied? So obviously you had Marley, they got you little Marley, a new recreation of this teddy. But how else would you keep yourself amused?
Well, so during my primary school years, up until the age of 11, I did enjoy sport. My mum took me to the doctor once because she was concerned that I was too serious for my age, which is an interesting observation, particularly given your comments about my observations around social status. But actually, I was getting to a point where intellectually I needed to be stimulated a little bit more. I must have, from somewhere in our family, inherited some intellectual prowess of some level. I wouldn't ever claim to be an intellectual, but I was fascinated by nuclear war. I was fascinated by the concept that Russia were going to attack us. I was fascinated by, and this is going to sound really weird, by Marxist countries like Albania. And I used to listen to Radio Tirana on the BBC service at like 10 o'clock at night in my bed when my parents thought that I was asleep. I was just fascinated by this other world. But anyway, the doctor concluded that I wasn't too serious. It was just that I needed more intellectual stimulation. And luckily, as I said, I passed the 11 plus, and that meant that I was then thrown into a state-run grammar school called Churston Grammar School, which in many ways was defining for me because I was surrounded by people who were smart, or smarter, certainly than me. So that was good. But two things happened, I think, as a result of going to that school. The first was I really grew to love a sport, which was basketball. Which may sound weird because we're talking about a school in Devon, and Devon isn't really renowned for its basketball prowess. But we were lucky; we had two coaches at the school that coached for England, and of course, if they coached tiddlywinks, then I probably would have ended up playing tiddlywinks. But basketball was a thing, and I was fortunate because I'm 6'4", so relatively big, and therefore able to kind of learn how to play basketball and train and develop and become quite adept. I was kind of a good regional player. I was around the fringes of the England junior men team, played National League and so forth. So sport and basketball in particular was so formative for me. And even to this day, or certainly recently, I was involved in basketball at a board level with Basketball England because I think if you're going to do some extracurricular activity, you really want it to be a passion point. And the reason I love basketball for is many reasons, but one of the big reasons, it's probably the most diverse sport in the country. It reaches parts of the country that other sports don't. It may surprise people to know that it's like the second highest participation sport for, I think, under 18s in the whole of the country. And there's a real passion and interest in it, but it is a real equaler as a sport, and I love it for that reason. The second thing that happened to me at school, which I think was pretty defining and probably is the reason why I'm here talking to you now, was an English teacher called Mr. Aitken saw me perform in a school election. I say perform because myself and a guy called Ludovic Boycott decided that we would represent the Monster Raving Loony Party in the school election, and sort of slightly, I guess, undermined the nature of the school election because we came second in the overall election. But we put on these characters and acted these roles. But what that did was it gave me great confidence in terms of just standing in front of a school audience and speaking. And he asked me to take part then, as a result of that, Mr. Aitken asked me to take part in public speaking competitions. And lo and behold, as a state school, they don't normally perform particularly well in these. Obviously public schools did usually very well. And we ended up at the national championships at the Café Royal, and I was the main speaker talking to this crowd of hundreds with esteemed judges. And now when I think back, I helicopter out of myself and think, how on earth did I do that without just collapsing on the floor? And we did really, really well. We didn't win, but it was such great training for standing in front of people and confidently sort of describing your thoughts or presenting or making a case. And I think that, for many reasons, is one of the reasons why I ended up doing what I do.
Wow, I did not know. And again, I've known you for maybe 2 decades, and I knew none of this. God, wait, I've not been very good, have I? I feel I've been a very bad friend.
Well,
And so the first thing I'd say is the basketball. So you do have a slight advantage. Obviously, I'm sure you're very good, but you're pretty tall, so that's good. So I'm sure it goes a long way.
well, the only thing I'd say, Lynn, is when I was on the fringes of the England squad and playing at a national league, I was playing against guys that were 6'8", in the England squad there was a guy called Alan Bannister, I think his name was, and I think he was 18, and at the age of 18 he was 7'4". So
Oh my God.
the better you got, the smaller you got. That's what I always say.
Oh well, there you go. Again, something I did not know. I didn't even know you could get that tall. I thought that was just sort of the Guinness World Record type heights, but there you go. I'm obviously hanging around with the wrong people.
Yeah.
So, and also the thing, so Mr. Aitken obviously got you into public speaking. Well, he spotted something in you that you were good at, and he obviously helped you bring that out. This is maybe a slightly unfair question, and I'm maybe completely barking up the wrong tree, so I'm sure you're going to set me right. When you talked about your brother at the beginning, and obviously your parents having to see him, I can imagine, and I'm putting words in your mouth because this is just what I would think,
Yeah.
that obviously a lot of attention would have been on your brother at that point. And I imagine as a kid, maybe at the beginning you didn't realise, I'd imagine that would get quite tough because although they wouldn't have meant it like that. So A, is that true? And B, do you think through public speaking it was a nice moment to have a bit of spotlight when you really knew what you were talking about and you obviously had that admiration of people that were listening?
Well, it's a great question. I've not thought about it like that. I mean, inevitably, not for 1 second did I resent the time, and I didn't think about it any differently. And actually, on the one hand, my parents were away a lot. My brother was obviously away, and I was being moved left, right, and centre. But it meant that I got to spend time with my great uncle Bert and Auntie Doris, who were just the most wonderful people. And you don't hear the names Bert and Doris these days, do you? But that says it all. But yeah, I mean, maybe it was a reaction to feeling like not having enough attention. But I'm not sure about that. I think that I was a painfully shy child. Like when my relatives used to come round to the house, I used to run upstairs, and my mum and dad had to apologise for the fact that I wasn't coming to see my great auntie Ebsy, who frankly scared me. But that's probably the reason why. But I was painfully shy, and I think sport in the first instance really encouraged me to feel confident with those around me, to have a voice and to feel part of a unit. And then the public speaking itself gave me, I guess, the platform to say, well, okay, I'm going to be on my own in this bit. I mean, again, it was a team sport because you had a chair and a voter of thanks and all that good stuff, but I was the main speaker. And you're right, the attention is on you. And whether I like it or not, I think that the role I performed today is you're a spokesperson. I'm a representative of the wonderful people that I'm able to work with. And so if I can do that well, then I'm playing my role as well as other people play theirs. So I think it's definitely trained me to be confident. And now, dare I say it, there's probably going to be an example next week where I'm going to be absolutely petrified. But there isn't a public speaking occasion now or a moment where I'm in front of people where I fear, that I'm going to mess up or get it wrong. I mean, I will do, but I don't, get terribly nervous now. And I think that's all thanks to Mr. Aitken and the wonderful people at the Cafe Royal back in 1988.
Wow, well, Mr. Aitken, thank you from me too. I mean, I think the thing is, you almost need someone to believe in you, don't you? And I think that's, half the battle, especially coming from a kind of poorer background where maybe the prospects aren't the same. Your mum and dad don't know the CEO of a company, or, the nepotism's not the same for working class people a lot of the time. And, I think I sort of relate to your public speaking because I was bullied at school quite badly, and I remember doing a competition. It was a little stand-up show where you could dance, you could sing, and I remember telling some jokes that my brother told me, so it wasn't even my material. And I remember being on that stage in my shell suit and my little cheap sand shoes, and I remember telling these jokes and people started laughing. And I was like, oh my God, this is great. And then before I knew it, because I felt very safe on that stage, the bullies couldn't get me. I had the microphone.
Yeah.
So I would have that last laugh. So for me, and I think that was my one striking moment when I realised actually maybe I can do this public speaking thing. And at the time I didn't know what public speaking was. I was just on stage at school. But it did build the confidence. So whenever, we needed to volunteer or do public speaking in class, I was always up for it. So I do get it, because it is a bit of it's like the bug. It's like doing a karaoke song and then you want the second and third, But that's just me. Maybe just me and my family.
Yeah, well, count me out of the karaoke unless I've had a few whiskeys.
Oh, that can be sorted. So obviously, you're starting to build character then. So you're starting to, have a bit about you from that little shy kid that maybe wouldn't say boo to a goose. You're now, you're standing on sort of public forums, you're speaking. So how then from school age did you then start developing, or even get to uni? Let's go from school to uni. How did that leap happen?
Well, with some difficulty, if I'm honest. I think I look back now and maybe I wasn't that smart, or maybe I hadn't learned how to learn. I think one thing I learned at university was really how to apply myself to take on information. And maybe that style of learning, which was much more kind of book based and essay based. And in my case, I wrote 2 dissertations, which are, really methodical kind of pieces of research that then lead to, hopefully a well-argued narrative. And in fact, my history dissertation was about the history of the fishing industry in Brixham in the post-war years. So that probably gives me a strong, affinity for that whole industry. But I flunked my A-levels first time out. I think I got a CDE, and it wasn't good enough to get anywhere that I really wanted to get to. So I stuck around and did retakes. And during that time, I mean, all through my childhood, I'd worked, in different holiday relevant settings. So I worked in a chip shop. I started out as a table clearer. I ended up getting promoted to behind the counter. And then one day I got promoted to deputy fryer, which was a big day in the Lidstone household.
What a great job title.
Oh, yeah. And it meant I could smuggle fish out every now and again for my parents to eat. I ended up, working at holiday camp in a bar there, and then ultimately teaching students English when I was at university. But I'd always had jobs along the way, and actually, when I flunked my A-levels first time out, there was a conversation that was had with some of the people in Brixham, which was, well, why don't you take a job on a crabber or one of the boats? And this goes back to the fishing industry, right? So if you're not in the tourist industry in Brixham, you're probably going to be in the fishing industry or a related industry to fishing. And this was a moment in time. It was, do I give up on possibly the idea of academia and take a job on a boat? And by the way, in those days, you certainly earned a good amount of money if you worked on a fishing boat, on a trawler, but it meant you would go out to sea for 2 weeks at a time or maybe longer, and also, risk one of the highest mortality professions in the country, so, terribly dangerous profession. but well paid, but clearly not going to lead to academic success or anything else if you kind of went down that path. So I didn't do that. I went and did my retakes and got the grades that I needed to go to Kiel. And like I said, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I just thought I wanted to go to university. I was the first in my family, and thought I'd do an ology, so sociology and history. And then I had a wonderful time at university, and I did relatively well at Kiel. Got a 2-1, and then graduated into a recession. And I did well enough in sociology for the tutors there to say, we think you should do a PhD, which was amazing to me because I didn't think of myself as academic really. But of course I couldn't get the funding to do that. But if I had got the funding, I would have done, I had written a proposal around assessing youth culture in the UK using different types of research methodologies, including ethnographic and participant observation research, which basically means going and living as one in those communities. And but obviously I didn't get funding, and so I went on to the dole. I was unemployed for 6 months. Being unemployed anywhere is not great news, as I'm sure many of the people on here would know. Being in a seaside town in winter, when all the tourists have gone, was particularly depressing and challenging. And I couldn't necessarily see a way out, and it was hard to know what my next move was going to be. But then the happy accident that one of the happy accidents I described earlier came up, and that was I saw a job advertised in a graduate magazine, which basically said a leading FMCG company was looking for someone to conduct a research project into youth culture in the UK. And of course, it was almost like they'd written the brief for me. And it transpired, long story short, that job was with Coca-Cola. And that job then led to me falling into advertising because I was working closely with the advertising agency, and I hadn't really considered what a job in advertising would look like. But what I knew was I was fascinated by people, and today I'm still fascinated by people. I get my energy from people. I love working with people. The pandemic was a real challenge for me, as I'm sure it was for many people, but I just thrive off being around people. I'm fascinated by business and brands, and I enjoy creativity. I enjoyed certainly those golden years of advertising when Levi's were knocking out ads like Creek, or BBH were knocking out ads like Creek, and so I thought, well, this is brilliant. I've got a job in advertising, and I didn't really know what it meant, but there I was. So that's the journey into advertising from flunking my A levels.
Wow. And the thing is, at this point, what's your family saying? So not only have you graduated, but you're now, after being on the dole for such a long time, you're now working for Coca-Cola. Now that's not a tiny company. So what does your family say about all this?
Well, they were the proudest people. They celebrated everything that their children did. And, I was lucky to go on to achieve a whole range of different things, whether it was play basketball at a good level, or get a job with Coke and then get a job in advertising. And before my mum died, the last thing that she wrote in her notebook that she had by the side of her chair was that that the Creative Engagement Group had been sold to Huntsworth PLC. This was back in 2017. That was the business that we created, and she, even at that point, she was making a note of the achievements, which is wonderful. So my dad was embarrassingly proud. He would go down the streets of Brixham and tell people what I was doing, whether they wanted to hear it or not. They obviously, social media and those sorts of things didn't exist in those days. But I can tell you, if they had, and my dad had been on Facebook, it would have been humiliating and embarrassing. But it's so sweet, and I'm probably guilty of it now. I find myself, being fiercely proud of my children and their achievements. But certainly that was how they handled it. They represented.
I mean, you can only imagine, from their lens, living their kind of humble life. Because what was interesting, as you said, they had a really hard upbringing. So I bet you in their heads, they gave you a much easier upbringing because they obviously things improved, and but then you're now taking it to like the other level, a level that they probably had never seen before. So yeah, no wonder they were so proud. And do you think if they were still here today, what do you think they'd be saying to you?
Oh goodness. Well, they'd be probably. I'd have been substituted for their grandchildren, so they'd have been fiercely proud of them instead. I think you're right. I think they what I can say is all through those years of when I say it out loud now, actually not doing so well in my A levels. They could have put pressure on me. They could have made me feel like I'd failed. You know, losing the public speaking competition and coming a close second, they could have easily made me feel, that I hadn't quite achieved getting to the fringes of the England basketball, but not quite, making it a regular in the team. Could have made me feel, but they never did, and they were incredibly supportive. And actually, I think to some extent, Lynn, they didn't know any different. No one had been to university before, so they were just overjoyed that I was doing A levels, let alone anything else. That I was at a grammar school, so anything on top of that was high achievement, and they celebrated it. And like you say, when they reflected on where they'd come from and where we had been, in my younger years, and not able to pay the mortgage and so forth, I think it was an immense moment for them. And actually, my greatest point of pride, and this isn't as grandiose as it sounds, but when I started to achieve a certain level of salary, I was able to then start paying back by helping them pay off their mortgage, which was just, a really lovely moment. It wasn't a significant amount in the scheme of things because I think they put their mortgage down on the house in 1970 or something, and then had one minor extension. So it wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was a lovely ability to just sort of pay back somehow all their generosity.
Do you know, I actually am quite envious of that because I never got a chance to do that. I would love to have. My mum and dad didn't own their house; it was always a council house. But I think that's the thing I miss. I wish I could have gifted them or helped them in some way, whereas I never ever got the chance. So I think that's a really sort of sacred moment that you'll probably carry forever, I'd imagine.
Yeah, no, it's a nice thing, and my dad died at the age of 60, which I think is
Wow.
is young. I know you've been through similar, so but yeah, and he worked hard all his life to get to that point and was planning his retirement, and then suddenly out of nowhere, pancreatic cancer, and he was gone in 4 weeks, and it's a reminder for me to enjoy every moment, and I try to remind myself of that and to experience stuff and not take all this for granted because I'm 53 now, so hopefully I'll last a bit longer than him, but if I don't, then I've got to make sure I max out on all the chances and the opportunities and all the privileges that I've got.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, it's funny, I look at my sisters now and they're actually older now than what my mum was when she died. But when I look back, she was an old lady and they're
Yeah.
not old. They're like really young. It's like, the comparison that was made ages ago about the Sex and the City stars and the Golden Girls and how they're the same age but really older and different era. And a lot of people were calling that out and saying, no, that's shit, that's ageism. And I think it's just a reflection on society because things are just so different. And the other thing I want to ask you is, obviously you talked a little bit and you've mentioned it a couple of times, you missed out in the school competition, you didn't quite get into basketball, you were on the dole for a while. So obviously if you look at that, that's like quite a bit of adversity, even because at that time that's your world that you're in and you're not quite getting there. So what do you think you've learned from that, apart from, try harder and stick in, but mentally has that made you stronger?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, compared to a lot of people, it felt like adversity, and certainly the younger years, I probably didn't realise what was going on. So you kind of just lived your life as an 8-year-old or whatever. Um, but yeah, I do think that coming second quite a few times, not quite achieving my A levels, not quite being as good at basketball as I really, really wanted to be, not quite winning the public speaking. And I could look back. I mean, I had a fantastic time at Kiel, but a lot of people would say, well, you could have gone somewhere else. Well, maybe I was a nearly person in my mind, and I think that weirdly, a lot of people would say that I'm driven, and I am hugely competitive. And one thing my dad absolutely made me was competitive. He wouldn't let me win anything, whether it was Monopoly or table tennis or anything. Even from a young age, it was just never ever let me win. So I'm hugely competitive. I hate losing, whether it's Wordle or a game of Scrabble or squash or whatever. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's helpful characteristic as long as you kind of let go and not carry a grudge, etc. But I think I've definitely learnt to be more resilient, and certainly losing a parent, it's never easy, how old you are. So those sorts of things, growing up in a childhood where there was someone almost very very ill for a large portion of time, probably made me more resilient, even though I didn't realize it. So I think that it's all. I often describe any person's evolution and development as like a patchwork quilt of experiences. You start with a patch, don't you, and then you add a couple more,
Yeah.
and then you go do something else, you add something more, and you're informed by all the people that that you've been mentored by, or that you've learned from, or you haven't learned from, the experiences that you've had, the adversity that you faced, and suddenly your patchwork quilt fills up with a kind of Lynn-shaped or Russ-shaped eiderdown, showing his age. But I think, and I think that's really, really important. And a big part of mine probably is resilience, but it's also a recognition that mental well-being is a really important thing. We spend a lot of time thinking about that in this company, but something that's been very important to me and my family. Trying to ensure that if you spend most of your waking hours working for a company or doing something, that take it seriously, but you should enjoy it also, because as I say, you spend most of your waking hours doing it, so you should be able to have a laugh, you should be able to kind of enjoy the company of your colleagues and so forth. So I think all those things are pretty they're founded from my patchwork quilt, if you will.
God, take my patchwork quilt. You'll be in for a shocker. I'll show you that and tell you that another time. And
Brilliant.
then, the thing is, you talk about, all these things like resilience and being competitive. What would you say is your one superpower?
Well, I sort of touched on it. Other people say this of me, but I am able to take people with me, I think, and right or wrongly, I love people, and I work hard to understand their motivations and try to empathise, and that sort of old Charles Handy stuff about EIQ and all those sorts of things. I try to put myself into the shoes of others, the people who work with me, the the waiter in the restaurant, the the people that are less fortunate than us, and I try to constantly think about those things. What that means, though, is that I take an active interest in people. I genuinely remember a lot about individuals and where they are in their life and what's on their mind, and whether they've just had a nose operation or whatever it is. And I hope and I believe that that's important when it comes to leading an organization, or taking a team with you and encouraging them to do things, or trying to get the best out of them. I had an old basketball coach called Sprunt Hill I think it was from North Carolina. Couldn't make that name up, could you? But
Brilliant.
and he used to talk about red meat players and red roses players. And he used to talk about red meat players are people who just need to be balled out all the time to get the best out of them. They needed to be shouted at, they'd be told they were rubbish, etc. And there were red roses players, of which I was one, who needed to be told, don't worry, it'll be better next time. You missed a shot, but it was the right shot to take. You are a good player, reaffirming your ability and building your confidence. And I believe that in the industries that you and I inhabit, and the businesses that we are involved in, there are a lot more red roses players. So my superpower, if I have one, I'd never be as grand as to say that, is to understand what motivates people, to build confidence in a team, and to take them with me on a journey. And when I think about this business, and I know this isn't about the business, but we ran a business through a pandemic where we lost 40-50% of our revenue almost in the space of a few weeks, and we had to take the team with us. And I know a lot of people had to do that. but had to take them with us. We had to ask if they would take a salary cut in order to be able to save jobs. We had to ask all sorts of difficult questions through that period, and now into a cost of living crisis. And ultimately, taking people with you isn't an easy thing to do, and I think it requires time, effort, and empathy. So I think that's probably my shtick.
Well, do you know what? You're very humble, and I've been in your company in a few occasions where I can see how kind you are to the waiter, and it's not about being kind. You're just a decent person, and you're not someone, like we know a lot of people that aren't that nice in these circumstances. So it's always been a breath of fresh air. And you know what? I think people tuning in right now, and I can say it firsthand, you are actually a really thoroughly lovely person, and it doesn't surprise me that you are where you are today. And I think you owe a lot of thanks to your parents and to Mr. Aitken and to the ladies that got you Marley and all the shows of kindness that you've encountered through your life. So yeah, is there anything you would like to say to the wide group of people that have helped you get where you are?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you. That's very kind of you. And secondly, yeah, I mean, the people who got me where I am, it's a broad church, right? It's extraordinary. And if you think about all those different sliding doors moments, whether you'd given up on the public speaking, or whether you'd given up on and just gone on a boat, or actually decided that I wasn't going to sort of go for the Coca-Cola role, or that it sounded like too big a role, or actually advertising sounded a bit too glossy. I've had so many mentors, so many fantastic people who've helped me through my career. So I'm indebted to them, but I also take it very seriously, my responsibility to pay it back. And so whether it's CMN or mentoring, or work with universities, or engagement with Bloom, people like that, I think it's my duty, given the chances that I've had and the people that I've had around me, to try and do my bit. And that's my one little thing. I think we can all help. You're never too old to mentor, never too experienced to kind of help someone. I think it's really important and incumbent on us to help others get to the opportunities that we've had.
Amazing. Well, do you know what? I couldn't put it better myself. Basically, what you're saying ultimately is your karma is a wonderful thing, and it's all about paying it back and forward. And yeah, and do you know what? I think from what you're saying as well, just to sort of sum up, although you work really hard, clearly, I love the tip around, don't take it too seriously where you make yourself ill over it, have fun with it. And I love the fact now that you're fearless when it comes to public speaking, because they say, don't they, if you do things over so many hours, you become a master at it. So you're right, one day, you and I, we will trip up or we'll do whatever, but what's the worst that can happen, seriously? So thank you so much for everything today, for sharing, your story, stuff that I never even knew, God, over this time. And, I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, Lynn, and really enjoyed chatting, and look forward to catching up with you soon and seeing what your patchwork quilt looks like over a whiskey.
I know, on the QT, I'll tell you. Thank you.